welcome back, Fourth and Long Fits. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another off-season supporter series chat. And ladies and gentlemen, coming to me from Adelaide, South Australia, it is Jamie. Jamie, thank you for joining me today.
Donnie, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. So before we get into the footy talk, I like finding out just a little bit about the person that I'm talking with. So really quickly, a real quick bio of who you are outside of the game of footy.
Yeah, I'm 31 years old, Adelaide born and bred, living in the inner western suburbs of Adelaide. Love it. I have a beautiful partner and a beautiful 15-month-old daughter. So, um, sport fan, cricket and footy, typical Australian, but everything in between as well. Regularly like to keep my finger on the pulse of various sports around not only Australia, but around the world, really.
Fantastic, fantastic. I cannot wait for this. This is a footy podcast, and you being in Footy Mad Essay, I gotta ask, what is your favorite thing about the sport of footy?
I think you would get it a lot, but I think it is the tribal nature of it all. Uh, you know, once footy season rolls around, it kind of just takes over, and it becomes, religion and things like that. They always get associated with sports and sports fanatics. But it's a way to connect as well with a variety of people, something to kind of continue on a journey with or be part of a journey with. And then as well as that, it's family, community. It's a great time for me and my dad and my brothers to all get together and um, kind of enjoy something together. And not like we don't enjoy other things together, but again, it's that tribal kind of like us against them nature of it. And like I said, I'm a cricket fan, so it's just polar opposites in the way that you digest those individual sports. Like in summer, it's very laid back. It's less vitriolic, less like the blood pressure tends to stay down. You can just kind of enjoy it, watch it for what it is. But then football season, it's go, 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 go. It's high tempo, it's high pressure. Um, it's infectious, really. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep, I 100% agree. The tribalism is one of the things that I find fascinating about it because as we were talking off mic is that you just don't get it here because there's so many sportings. I mean, you don't just you have football, you have basketball, you have baseball, you have hockey, you have lacrosse, you have so many other sports. So really in Australia, if you think about it, yes, you've got basketball, you've got some others, but really it is cricket and it is footy, or it is NRL if you're in Queensland or
Of
New South
course. Yeah.
Wales. So it's kind of one of those where you do have that kind of one thing that really kind of takes up all your energy. So it's fascinating to hear. All right, I need you to go back back to your memories here. Can you remember your earliest footy memory?
Yeah, I can. It is fairly vague now. It would be from the early 2000s, but I remember my dad, he's always generally worked in sales for most of my life. And with that, um, you tend to work for companies that have corporate boxes at football stadiums. So I remember one weekend he was lucky enough to be able to enjoy a corporate box through his work at the time. And as a result, he got to bring along his family and myself and my brother at the time. And I even believe my stepmom, who is not a fan of football, but when there's free food and beverages, out there, why not? Right. So I believe it was a game against Melbourne, obviously a Port Adelaide game against Melbourne. And I remember that because Melbourne used to have a forward named David Neitz, and my dad actually really loved him. He appreciated him for the talented footballer that he was. And I remember him just, whenever David Neitz got the ball, he's like, oh, of course, and he's going to kick it. And generally he did. So I also remember at the time I had a jacket and it was navy blue and red. Um, and it was probably one of my only jackets at the time. And obviously, being winter, I had to pop a jacket on, of course, to keep warm. And I remember thinking to myself, like, haha, this is pretty funny. I probably look like a Melbourne supporter, but in reality, I'm just a kid. I'm a Port supporter, and yeah, I'm here with my dad enjoying free soft drink and pies and pasties.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Absolutely love it. All right. You've kind of teased it a little bit. And anybody that's watching the YouTube video will tell by the hat what's your club. So, really quickly, Port Adelaide Power supporter. How is it that you
Yeah.
came to become a Power supporter besides maybe the fact you're in SA?
It's definitely just a family based, like hereditary thing. Um, I have a great relationship with my dad. He was a Port Adelaide Magpies supporter from way back, and just naturally, as Port gained their license with the AFL, he moved to the Power to support the Power in the AFL, and yeah, I just kind of went along off the back of that, and the passion rubbed off on me for sure. I think passion's another word that I could have used before when you asked me about my why I love football. Yeah, the passion that my dad tends to show a bit too much uh, on game day. Yeah, it definitely rubs off. And then as you grow up, you kind of do your own research. You learn your own way about the club that you support, and the more you learn about Port Adelaide, especially once you already are a Port Adelaide supporter, the more you kind of fall in love.
Yeah, 100% agree. And so much history when it comes to Port Adelaide, both with the Magpies and then eventually with the AFL and the Power. So I asked this as a family club, and I loved hearing this. Was there ever any doubt that you were going to be a Power supporter for your dad? And then is there anybody else in the family that supports another club? And if so, how's the banter?
Look, no one in my direct family supports anyone else. So, um, like I said, I have a brother who's 2 years younger than me, who I grew up with, and then my dad and my stepmom had another son, um, about 14 years ago. So he's a power supporter as well. And then my mum and my stepdad on the other side, they're power supporters too, a little bit more subdued in their fandom, I guess you'd say, in their supporting. But then, yeah, the further out you go in my family, you get Adelaide Crow supporters and various other ones, North Melbourne Kangaroos supporters, but the people who I would say are in my direct family who do support a football team or follow football, they're generally Port Adelaide supporters, which tends to make it a bit more comfortable come Christmas time or family gatherings. Yeah, there's not so much. I think my uncle is a Crow supporter. He's a very serious Crow supporter, but I think he kind of knows the lay of the land when it comes to family gatherings and things like that. He's at a hiding to nothing if he tends to bring up a controversial view. So we generally just try and keep it PG and
Mhm.
just talk about football broadly and generally try to rag on Victoria mostly. That's, if anything, most of the time Adelaide and Port Adelaide supporters can agree on that. So it's always fun.
It's been very fascinating. People that have listened to the podcast go, I've been trying to find Sandful VFL and Waffle supporters, and when I've chatted with the
Yeah.
Sandful supporters, is fascinating to hear that discussion of the kind of almost vitriol, or at least distaste for Victorians. It's kind of fascinating to hear that kind of discussion a little bit. So it was interesting to hear you say that the mutual respect between the two is a dislike for Victoria. Absolutely love it. All right, so. We'll stay with this. Can you remember the first Power or Magpies item that you were ever given or bought?
I actually didn't and still don't actually own that much merchandise. And I think it wasn't until we started going to games regularly that I got a scarf for Christmas, I think, or my birthday. My birthday's fairly close to Christmas. It's the start of December. So I think I got a scarf maybe 2006, 2005, maybe. Um, and I think that was the first thing that I can actually remember. I
Mhm.
may have got something when I was younger, like a toy or something like that, or a book. But yeah, the first piece of merchandise that I can actually like remember receiving and using and wearing frequently, it's that scarf, which I still have. I don't tend to wear it. I've gained another couple scarves along the way, but
Mhm.
for if someone wants to join me at the football who doesn't regularly go, I've got it there for them.
Fantastic. I always got to keep those keepsakes for sure. All right. So this next one I absolutely love because as I've said to many people, fandom is something that it's never the same with every single person. People fan differently, people support differently. So it's always interesting to hear kind of everybody's side to it. So for me, just really quickly, can you describe your fandom for Port Adelaide? Are you somebody that it is a live and die type of thing that while the footy is on, everything is Port Adelaide, or can you kind of step away from it for a bit?
Um, it it has ebbed and flowed in my life. Being, I guess, my partner, she isn't really into sport or football or anything like that, so that tends to help switch off. I feel if she was a bit more passionate or interested in sport, it could tend to roll on the
Mm-hmm.
fandom and kind of just bounce off each other, good or bad. But the fact that she isn't really interested in it, it allows me to kind of switch off. Whereas previously, when I was single, um, you've got obviously got a lot more time. You can kind of just go here, there, and everywhere with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it has changed. I would say it's game day, especially. It's fever pitch, especially when Port are playing finals. It's the nerves. It's the heart palpitations, I guess you could say. But then I kind of it's probably through a journey of self-awareness and things like that too. Because if you can't control it, you can just get into a spiral if you are passionate with football in your emotions. But what's done is done, really. At the end of a game, you're either high on it. It's the agony and the ecstasy of it all, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
either up here or down there with your emotions for that period after the game. But once I get home, put the keys in the door and whatnot, I tend to um, just try and take it for what it is and look ahead. I try not to dwell on things as much as I perhaps used to.
No, it makes sense. I'm kind of one of those. I've told my wife a few times. I said, give me 10 seconds after the game is over to just, especially if they've lost, just give me that 10 seconds to just kind of let it kind of just let that frustration just and then I'm good. Like that's I
Yeah,
kind of so I know exactly how you feel there. It's like you got to be able to let it go because if you let it fester, it really affects you. So 100%
yeah. I
agree.
remember when I was a teenager, and my dad is, like I've mentioned, he's super passionate, and a lot of emotion can be hitched onto how your football team has performed over the weekend. And because it
Mhm.
is a weekend by weekend sport, your working week off the back of it it
Mhm.
can be affected. Or when I was in school, even when I was a teenager and in my late teens, early 20s, my stepmom used to hate it if Port lost. She would check the score just to see what kind of mood we would be in when we
Mhm.
get home. Um, because then, yeah, we'd either be filthy and be filthy for a couple of days and just, yeah, be dwelling on it, or alternatively be really happy and
Mhm.
jovial when we get home. So yeah, it tended to last longer, the pain or the happiness, but now it's a
Mhm.
bit more fluid.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that one. Alrighty, so we'll jump to it. I love this one. Can you remember the first port game that you ever attended live?
Yeah, so I mentioned the one that I went to with the corporate box. So I'll move that one to the side. Um, I remember during that period, I think there was another corporate box visit or whatever.
Mhm.
Not really attending for my own sake, I guess you could say. So I guess the first times that I went to the football would have been with my dad, and I believe it was the 2007 season because we'd started the year quite well. we weren't members at that stage, and I was about 14 or 15 at the time, and uh, yeah, Port were obviously playing really well that year. So then we started going to a few games, and I'm just trying to remember. I remember there was a game against Carlton in 2007, and I believe it ended up being the game that Travis Boak got nominated for a Rising Star for that year. It was a good game. I think we might have been behind, or we might have been ahead actually, and Carlton came back, and then we ended up winning. And like I mentioned, Travis Boak played a really great game as a young player. And ended up getting a Rising Star nomination for it. That's one that sticks out in my mind in that year. We went to quite a few that year. I can't remember one before that or after that. It kind of is testing my memory a little bit, but that's probably the one that sticks out as far back as I can kind of think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of those. I kind of agree. Sometimes those corporate box ones that you're so worried about, hey, I get free stuff, and you're not always watching the game. So that to be able to
Yeah.
find that one where you actually got to watch it, and for a team to play as well as it is, that's really awesome. So, already we jumped. I love this question. It's always fun for me. Is that this isn't easy? This is like picking your favorite child for some people. Do you have a favorite Port player of the past, and do you have a favorite current player on the Port list?
Yeah, well, I was kind of expecting it because I have listened to a few episodes of these fan episodes that you've been making, and I have a funny one because uh, he's only just retired, but Robbie Gray would technically count as a past player now.
Mm-hmm.
It seems a
Hey,
little unfair, but
no, it's hey, it's perfectly fair. Technically, he's of the past, so you got me
yeah,
there.
yeah, 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 definitely. There's just a guy like again. I started attending football seriously in 2007, and along with Travis Boak, he was another one that debuted that year, and just the way that he was able to turn games himself and impact games himself. Some of the freakish things that he managed to do as a smaller player, I guess you could say, was phenomenal. And I've seen it plenty of times live and on TV. Just some of the magical things that he was able to do. And you could tell he had a high football IQ, they like to call it, because he would do things that everyone else on the field had no idea that he was going to do. He was just always seemed a couple of steps ahead, and it was amazing to watch when he was on. Um, so past player, you asked current player, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. I really have a soft spot for Charlie Dixon. I love the way he attacks the game of football, and I think for a lot of people, you either love him or you hate him. More so the broader football fan landscape. You either love him or you hate him. But as a Port supporter, you can kind of appreciate what it is that he brings to the game. And I think he's fairly unique in the way that he's used and the way that he does go about football. Like he's not your oh, like Josh Kennedy for West Coast Eagles of the past, who's just recently retired. He was very lead up, get the ball, and you can kind of bank on him generally kicking the goal, and he's fairly accurate and whatnot. But Charlie, it's a bit of a different role. He plays up the field a lot. He draws key defenders out to provide room for other forwards and smaller forwards, which goes unnoticed because you don't really get a stat for that. But then when he is in the forward 50, he's crashing packs, his presence, he's just big and bustling, and he can take a great mark. And for a lot of the knocks that he gets on his kicking ability, he's actually been fairly accurate in the games that he's played over the last 3 years. Last year being half a year, pretty much, because he missed a lot of it. Um, so if there was ever a knock on him early days, it was his kicking accuracy. But along with the big body crashing packs, he's actually improved a lot on his kicking game over the last 3 years. If you look at the stats, so yeah, I love him, and he's kind of a big when you get to know him off the field or through social media and things like that. He's just a normal guy from North Queensland who kind of enjoys the quiet life of Adelaide. He's a big teddy bear, I guess you could say, off
Yeah,
the field.
he's one of those. I absolutely love his game. I agree with you. I think if he can get his body right, He could be an absolute terror for most teams because it's hard because if you put a nimble defender, he outbodies you. If you put a big defender on him, he's athletic enough, he can do things that big defender can't stop him at. His marking ability is insane. His ability to mark it one-handed sometimes is frightening.
Yeah. Have
And
you
he
seen him hold a football? It looks tiny in his
hmm
hands.
he palm I can't tell you how many times I've seen him one-hand it and he just makes it look so effortless. And it's one of those, it's impressive because it does give him that ability that if he is being held, he's got that big mitt to be able to put there and snatch it. And he's unselfish too. The one thing is
Yeah,
he's not just going to go
definitely.
back and always kick it. He's going to look for teammates, which I find fascinating. So I really hope he gets his body right because he can be one hell of a thing. That and the bastard is intimidating as hell if he
Yeah,
comes
yeah, for
at you
sure.
for
Just
sure.
having him, its presence, he draws a lot of people to him, which is a distraction for
Mhm.
opposition teams. Just him being there, opposition are like, how do we go about it? And even if they have a plan, sometimes in games, if he's on, you can see teams go away from their plan to just try and negate his presence. So
Mhm.
I could go on really, but we're limited for time.
Yeah,
This is not a
it's
Charlie Dixon podcast.
hey, I appreciate it. He's very much one of those guys I adore when it comes to his game. Like I said, he just needs to get his body right. So, all
Yeah,
right,
definitely.
I
All
love.
reports he's going well in that regard
I agree.
preseason.
I agree. I hope so. Him and Orazio Fantasia both. I hope they get their bodies right because both great players that I think need to be on the
Yeah,
park. So,
definitely.
all right. I love seeing the sparkle in people's eyes when I ask this question. Most memorable moment as a Port Adelaide supporter.
Uh so I mean there's a lot, right? If you
Hmm.
follow football enough, yeah, that and go to enough games to experience the ecstasy of it all, there is a lot. Finals, winning finals are always great, but I think the games that you're not expected to win and then win stand out. And again, there's a few. Probably going back a while. I need to quickly kind of think of one. There is always one I think of, and it it's probably because the season that we had was so terrible. I think it was in 2012. Terrible year. I think we won 4 games all up that year, but there was a game against North Melbourne at Amy Stadium where we were about 5 or 6 goals down in the last quarter. And for whatever reason, North Melbourne just stopped. We built a head of steam. And yeah, bang, 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 off the back of another player, Jay Schultz, who was a favorite of the past. Uh, yeah, we just chipped away, and in the end, we found ourselves 1 goal down with not much time, and there was an ex-player named Paul Stewart. He found the ball on the half-forward flank, sold a little bit of candy, and ran in and kicked a goal. And I remember at the time, my voice was so hoarse from just shouting and yelling, and I think I had a tear in my eye, just because it was such a bad season. The club was at such a in a poor place across the board, club, team, everything. Coach in the end ended up getting sacked that year. Um, but that when you're having a bad year, that piece of gold that you can just kind of like, I finally came to a game and we've won. It stands out. And like I mentioned, I think because it stands out in comparison to the rest of the year, I always kind of go back to that one as one of my favorites. uh, like I said, there's been so much more satisfying times or periods of time where the team's been doing well and we've had great wins or whatnot. And like I said, finals wins are always great, but that one kind of stands out. It's a bit of a different one, um, a different one for me. But last gasp wins as well. They always tend to stick out when you're right at the line, and then you get ahead and you keep it.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. One that I find fascinating, and I meant to ask this when I talked to my Crow supporter earlier in the year, but the showdown. I mean, do you have a favorite showdown moment? Because there's one that pops into my head. I'm interested to see if it's the same one, because a late winner is one that you would think would be something you could never forget. So, do
Yeah.
you have a favorite showdown moment?
Yeah. So I think a lot of Port supporters really enjoyed the last showdown that was at Amy Stadium. I think it was showdown 35, where Chad Wingard kicked 5 goals for the game and he kicked a late winner. That's got to be up there. That's a great win. I think, and then the other favorite I have is the first one at Adelaide Oval, because it was new ground, new territory, and Port were at a, a great upward trajectory, but it was still fairly on in that season. Um, but we went there, Adelaide Oval, and we just tore them apart. I think we won by around 50 points. So it was a very satisfying win. Um, but I guess if you were to put the two against each other, it would probably be the one before that, the last one at Amy Stadium, where uh, Adelaide Crows had the game in their pocket. There was no way that we probably should have won that game, and had it been uh, not for a late, I guess, missed kick by I think his name is Lewis Johnston for the Adelaide Crows, had Patrick Dangerfield all on his own, top of the goal square ish. And had he kicked it to him, Dangerfield almost definitely would have kicked the goal, and that would have put the game away. It would have sealed it, done. But he didn't, and it ended up getting rebounded. We kicked the goal, and that created the run on that we had to win that game. So I guess I got to say that one. Yeah, definitely the last showdown at Amy Stadium.
Awesome, awesome. So we go from good, unfortunately, to bads, because my next question, unfortunately, is last season. Well, we got it. I know most people at Port Adelaide don't want to talk about it. It's not exactly the most memorable season, especially with an 0-5 start. And you kind of
Very
battled back, but
frustrating.
just fell a little short. So, thoughts on last year? Because I know I'll raise my hand. I had Port as one of my teams in the top four, having a chance to be in the fly contendership, and I don't think anybody saw the 0-5 start coming.
No, no. And I think what made it even more frustrating was there was the games like the showdown and round one against Brisbane, where had it been not for a last gasp kick after the siren, or not for 4 to 5 injuries in the Brisbane game,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people would agree that we probably would have got over the line. And then it kind of turns the start into a 2-3 or a 3-2. Um, and I guess that summed up the season. We were always just a couple of goals off the pace. And it's definitely frustrating because as Port supporters, you know what you're capable of, especially off the back of 2 preliminary finals. And the team wasn't that different, albeit for a lot of annoying injuries along the way. So you're chopping and changing a lot. Um, and in any sport, in any level, you need consistency, especially with your playing group. And when that isn't there, it's very hard, which made 2021 significant, if you weren't aware that we also had a lot of injuries and in-season surgeries in that season as well. And then to get to the preliminary final. And I guess you hear it all the time with football teams that go deep in finals for a 2 or 3 year period. They're just gassed afterwards, and then they have a regression. And then when you keep that in mind and then look at clubs like Geelong and Sydney, like your team, who consistently do play in finals, you just respect them even more because they kind of go against that trend of clubs who have a high time, and then they've played finals for that long, they've had shorter preseasons, have that regression.
Mm-hmm.
And again, yeah, frustrating would typify last season for sure. But I'm a fairly balanced viewer of football, especially post match and post season. It is what it is. Yeah, we were a couple of goals off the pace. I don't think the team's gone backwards in terms of its playing group, uh, from last season to this season. So I would definitely expect a bounce back. And the teams that finish in that ninth to 11th kind of position, the story of their year generally is that they lose a lot of close games. And that's where we found ourselves last year. For whatever reason, we couldn't seal the deal, or we found ourselves so far back early that we had to waste a lot of energy trying to bridge the gap the in the second, third, and fourth quarters. And yeah, a lot of the time fell short, which is annoying.
Yeah, I can 100% understand. I remember in my podcast we were getting to round 10 and I'm like, if they can find that one little thing, they've still got a shot because you'd rather have the 0 and 5 start so you get that 5 losses done early. And they would get some momentum and then they'd lose a game that they probably shouldn't have. And then they'd get a little more momentum and then they'd lose. And it's like
Yeah,
they could never get that cohesion of 2, 3, 4, 5 games in a row to kind
yeah,
of balance
yeah,
out the start.
definitely.
And then, like I said, you said injuries. Dixon got hurt. Fantasia basically did not play at all last year. You had injuries with Rosie. You had injuries with
Yeah,
so many players got hurt that I felt horrible for Port because they'd get somebody back, somebody would go down hurt. They'd get 2 guys back, somebody would go. So they were just kind of snake bitten all year. It was just nothing could ever go your way. So I agree with you. I think there's a good chance of seeing a bounce back this year. So we'll jump to the off season, and I'm fascinated to hear this. The SA boy Jason Horn Francis is now a Port Adelaide player. Hopefully, Orazio Fantasia is healthy, and I'm hearing good things about his training load. So you get a gun midfielder. Many people say could be a generational player in Horn Francis, hopefully almost a new player in Orazio Fantasia back.
basically, yeah.
Your off season has looked really, really solid. Do you keep an eye on their off season normally? And then what are your thoughts on that? Because I think Port's actually done really well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I do keep an eye on the off season. It is a good time to switch off and things simmer down uh, in that regard. But yeah, I watched with keen interest, and the whole Jason Horn Francis thing was definitely a surprise when it came about. You know, everyone's watching the number one draft pick in his first year. So, and being from SA, you kind of keep an extra eye on him with interest. And we know as Port supporters that he actually trained with a little bit with our academy beforehand during the season in 2021. So, again, having connections with our club through his stepfather as well, you're just kind of looking. And I think Port Adelaide has built a culture where if you're anyway connected to Port, yeah, sure, you might go off and spread your wings elsewhere, but we always kind of have the feeling that we're always a chance to get people back. Brad Ebert is a great example of that. And yeah, so did I expect it to come that quickly? No, not at all. Did I expect it to be a chance to happen at some stage? Yeah, for sure. Um, from what I understand, there was a lot of injury problems that didn't really get spoken about a lot. I know that there's a lot of media, and again, Victorian media, who like to highlight an apparent attitude problem. But when you're in SA and you've got the SA NFL here playing, he was playing senior football, and from all reports, there was no attitude problem in that, and that was senior football at a pretty high level from what most people regard this the second best football competition in the country behind the AFL, which is the professional league. Um, so it's interesting how narratives change. And I actually hosted someone at a New Year's party who works in sports medicine, and uh, obviously confidentiality considered with anything medical, but basically had the conversation along the lines of that his knee was absolutely shot,
Hmm.
and the whole ice bath thing comes up. And the interesting thing about it was this guy who I hosted mentioned that essentially, if he was to get in an ice bath, his knee, uh, his blood vessels would have constricted so much that it would have caused him agonizing pain from the knee down, or I guess you could say the quad down. Um, and it just adds a little bit of backstory because obviously you hear in the media Jason Horn Francis didn't have ice bath, and it became this whole thing, and they attach that to the narrative. But again, there's always more to the story, and we as football enthusiasts, we only know surface level information. There's a whole world of football professionalism and storyline that goes on behind closed doors that we will never know, because if you were to know that, your club's not doing very well keeping professional matters to themselves. So
Mhm.
yeah, with all that being said, he had surgery after we drafted him, after we traded for him, sorry, and from all reports that went great. He's back running again, and yeah, I guess at the it's his second year, right? So it I don't expect him to be winning any Brownlow medals this year. But I am intrigued to see how he fits into the system, because you've mentioned Connor Rosie already, and there's other players like Zach Butters, Willem Drew,
Mhm.
who doesn't get a lot of attention. They're all young, and then you've got Travis Boak. So where he will fit in the rotation is what I'm most interested about. I don't really have any doubts of his ability. Um, and I'm more than willing to give him time. He's no, I don't think he's even 20 years old yet, so happy to have him for sure. But um, I'm just more interested and intrigued to see how he progresses from here in our club.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I know if he turns into what many of the scouts said he would, this could look like the move of the century for Port Adelaide for sure. So before we go to my next question, I'm going to ask this because as we kind of discussed off Mike before we started the podcast, is I'm an avid listener to the Rush Hour in South Australia, and I remember the day that somebody put a sticker outside of Alberton to fire Hinkley. So I gotta ask, as a Port Adelaide supporter, this is a topic that I was rather intrigued how quickly Fire Hinkley started to kind of gain some momentum amongst the fan base. And I know I've heard some rumors that sometimes Hinkley has not always been the most likable when it comes to the coach, when it comes to at least the fan base. So I ask you, as a Port Adelaide supporter, your thoughts on Hinkley. Is he the right guy? Or is this just, I mean, are they finally going to see that he's not the guy that could take Port any deeper, and they will move on after this season?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. And I'm not convinced that the person who put the Sack Hinkley sign on Port Road was even a Port Adelaide supporter. I tend to think that it was a rival supporter just trying to stir the pot.
Mhm.
But hey, who knows? The interesting thing is, I think it's had a couple of waves, the whole Sack Hinkley notion. Obviously, when he started as coach for Port Adelaide, we had a great 2 year period, and everyone expected great things. And then in the 15 to 17 seasons, uh, well below expectations, and that was the first kind of edition of the Sack Hinkley
Mhm.
kind of uh, moniker, I guess you could say. And 18, 19, again, things didn't happen, and it was fever pitch. But he was contracted at the time. 2020 came around, and we were the minor premier and sat top all year. So preliminary final. It simmered down again. However, um, last year rolls around again, start the season in underwhelming fashion, and then it rears its head again. And I think in football, and I think in a lot of sport, people just, if you haven't got the prize after a certain amount of time,
Mhm.
change is as good as a holiday kind of thing. And from my perspective, I think I've had the conversation on Twitter before. Is Hinkley a good coach? Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a good coach. Is he a great coach? I don't think he's proven that, because great coaches win premierships. And um, if you are in tune with professional football as much as you can be as a general punter, you do understand that it's very, very hard. And everyone in the football industry would attest to that. It is very, very hard. Have we been close? Yes. Is that a mark of a good coach? Yes. And again, the wider professional football landscape would agree that that is a tick in the good column. Um, in terms of make or break, yeah, it probably is. It's his last year of the contract. If we don't do great things this season, I would assume that it's shake hands and thank you for what you've done. Yeah, you've provided a culture that is attractive for players to come to and to flourish in early. I think he's got the best out of a lot of B grade players along the journey. And from all reports, he's a great people person and a great father figure for players. But whatever it be, whether it's just sheer bad luck or that je ne sais quoi of coaching a professional football team, it just hasn't got there. So I do think that if we don't, and it's interesting to think, I don't know whether I can say what my marker is. I'm kind of sitting on the fence between is it grand final appearance or is it premiership? Because I think that the major detractors, and there are a lot in the social media landscape, um, who, in my opinion, don't know how to keep a balanced view. They kind of change themselves between he hasn't won us a premiership and he hasn't got us to a grand final. So, with that being said, what is it like?
Mhm.
What do you guys want? I'm not sure what I want. Obviously, we all want to win a premiership. So whether it's a grand final or a premiership, it's a high bar.
Mhm.
Either way, I don't know if even a preliminary final will be good enough, but it's an interesting time. If we don't do well and he gets an extension, yeah, it'll be an interesting time. I don't think that'll happen though. I do think that at the end of the season, unless we're yeah at the very very pointy end,
Mhm.
we'll probably have a new coach next year. But I'm the type of person who likes to cross bridges when we get to them. I'm just hoping that in reference to last season or opposed to the last season, we start the year off well and we build momentum from there. And I hope that the players we expect to improve. The players we expect to come back who didn't have good seasons last year come back and play well, and we win some games of football. First things first, really.
Mhm. No, 100% understand. It's one of those, and I always, when it comes to people that are like, we should win the grand final, I go, you are aware there's 18 teams and only one gets to win every year. I mean, sometimes it's an expectation I find fascinating. I'm like, you're setting an expectation. You're actually setting yourself up to fail more times than to actually win.
Yeah, and that's
So
sport, right?
it is one of those where it's like for me, like if I put myself in a port hat, I think another preliminary final is where you would hope a grand final as well, but again, there's so many different things. I mean, as you saw last year, so many injuries, so many things just didn't go your way. So we'll have to see again. So it's kind of a perfect transition for me here. Is what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on next year? I mean, we kind of said Hinkley's kind of on that proverbial hot seat. You get some guys back. Like I said, Jason Francis is in. Unfortunately, yes, Robbie Gray retires. So, do you see Port with a bounce back? Do you think they're in the finals discussion next year, or are you kind of one of those? Let's see, because again, last year you could be snake bitten at any time.
Yeah, I definitely expect to make finals. I think any team that goes into a season not expecting or not, yeah, like not have that as a minimum, you're
Mhm.
probably working against yourself. So, and the quality of the team, it, I mentioned how before how there's always those teams that finish ninth to 11th and it's generally because they lose a lot of the close games. And then you find that they kind of have that bounce back and they find a way to win those close games. So I expect to play finals. I expect us to um, be on the more positive side of the ledger in the win column. Um, I think we're a fairly well-rounded team. As most Port supporters, I think our tool defender stocks are probably going to be tested as they always are. A good in saying that, I think we finished top five in defense last season, even in a bad year. We're a very team defense focused side. I still would have liked to, yeah, get a tall defender. Not that there were many on the market. It would have been interesting if Radaglia came over from Geelong, but he was only a project kind of in the defense at the end of the season for Geelong, and that's kind of how it all came about. So that wouldn't have even guaranteed us, um, a definite tall defender who could take on the big forwards, like a lot of Port supporters said. So I'm hopeful. I'm confident that we'll have a good season. Um, we need to make Adelaide Oval a fortress again. Is another kind of footy platitude that a lot of people go with. But overall, I think we're fairly balanced. You mentioned Robbie Gray retired. In all honesty, I don't think he really contributed a lot in his last season or two. Maybe he still could do some magic things, and it was more about what he could do for the rest of the team. So in that regard, I think we've been brewing players underneath for a few years to kind of take over in that regard. So as much of it, it's a huge loss, kind of sentimentally. I don't think it's as much of a major loss objectively on the field. So Willie Rioli also came over. From all reports, he's looking really great, and he's a premiership player. He played with Scott Lycett even, yeah, for West Coast. So um, his family is here, and the interesting thing about Australia and football is, family is a big deal, and when you're comfortable where you are, it tends to reflect on the field. So, um, yeah, I'm confident about this season. I do expect us to play finals. Where we can go all depends on what happens in the season, but at a very minimum, I expect Connor Rosie I kind of expect him to challenge for the Brownlow this year. And Ollie to bounce back from his kind of Brownlow lull, which generally happens with Brownlow winners. So I think we'll be very dynamic.
It'll be fun to watch part for sure. I think next year is going to be it's going to be a slog because I think there's 14 teams that can compete for finals. I think I've said this in a couple of episodes. I think the bottom
Yeah,
four are going to make or break finals this year because if you lose a game to a bottom four side, that is going to really throw a spanner in the works unless you're playing really well against the top 10 to 12 teams. So it'll be
yeah.
fascinating. All right.
I
I Go ahead.
I think with the whole equalization policy that the AFL has introduced, and it's probably been around for nearly 10 years. You mentioned that there's about 14 teams who could probably go there. And I think that's apparent nearly almost every year now. And we're mentioning how hard it is to win a premiership with this equalization policy in place. Like, I go into nearly almost every season nowadays going, yeah, you need to play well because there's only 8 spots, and there is
Mhm.
generally always 12 to 14 teams who could make the 8. So um yeah, it just emphasizes that consistency of players that you have playing each and every week.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. All right. My next question is fun for me because I know, especially over here, a lot of people on online like to say that if they were the general manager or the list manager, they would make this move, this move, this move. So I'm gonna have a little fun with this. For one day, I'm gonna install you as the list manager for the Port Adelaide Footy Club. All 17 of the other teams are completely open. You can bring in one player from the competition to bolster Port Adelaide to get them ready to potentially run for a flag this year. Who's that one player and why?
It's definitely an interesting question, and um, I mentioned that most Port supporters would like a tall defender. Um, if you asked me a couple of years ago, I probably would have said Harris Andrews, but I don't think he played that well last year. And whether that was because he was under an injury cloud or whatnot, I'm not sure. But someone like him would be good. Um, but it's hard to say. It's spoiled for choice, I guess. He could come up. Everyone goes the you know the dynamic midfielders who who kind of tend to generally be up there in the Brownlow count each year. But I think we're pretty well versed in that
Mm-hmm.
regard. Um, uh, I'm not too sure. I think maybe a bit of blind faith in our own list management might play a part. Because then Charlie Dixon's not getting any younger, but I look at a guy like Todd Marshall and he's there, so um, I'm probably making this a bit too difficult. Um, um, but we'll go with Harris Andrews just because he's a tour defender, he's a proven All Australian, and
Mm-hmm.
that's probably our biggest area for improvement, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. One of the DeConing brother down in Geelong would be a nice one to
Yeah,
grow with. He'd be one.
yeah,
Barras
yeah,
from the West Coast Eagles because of his intercept ability. I think you bring him in and you have that two-headed monster of him and Alir could be dangerous in the backfield. It is spoils of riches, and it's fun because you get the people that are like they just try to grab the best player, the Bontempellis, the Clary
yeah,
Olivers, the Christian Petracas, and then you get the ones that are like, well, our weakness is, and then they say it, and then they grab, and it's fascinating because it does kind of catch the mind of a fan. Do they grab the flashy midfielder, or do they grab the person in the weak spot? Like for me, like as a Sydney Swan supporter, for me, I think it's the same thing. We were looking for a big body defender, and Barras there for a while. There were trade talks that Barras might be something that the Swans would try to do. I'd be rude. I'd take Alir back because I think the Swans miss him a little bit. But again,
yeah,
as I've said
definitely.
to many a Port fan, I'm happy for Alir that he's found some place that he's absolutely flourished in. I'm excited for him and happy
Yeah,
that he's there. Love to
he
have him
looks great
back.
in a Port Guernsey as
I'm
well.
not going to disagree with you on that one. He looks very snazzy in that black and teal for sure. Absolutely. So, all right, I'm gonna ask a couple of fun ones here for me because I was fascinated in 2020 and 2021. The grand final saw itself outside of Victorian soil for the first time in the Gabba and out in Perth at Optus Stadium. And I was very fascinated that the Victorian media started bringing up the topic of should the MCC potentially, I know the 50-year contract comment section, calm down. I know this is pie in the sky. Okay, could there ever be the possibility that the grand final could eventually become a traveling grand final, seeing Queensland, South Australia, back out to WA, even up to Sydney for a grand final? Your thoughts as an SA person on that? Or is there a little part of you that does kind of like the tradition of the MCG because it is the biggest stadium currently in Australia?
Yeah, I think the whole biggest stadium in Australia is a lot of crap, really. Like that's the only reason that you should have a grand final somewhere. I've done a tour of the MCG, and as fantastic as it is, and I acknowledge that. I guess you could say it's the home of football. Football in its early days was developed in Victoria. So I respect that and whatnot. You're also you're also satisfying, what is it, 20,000 MCC members, and I don't give a crap about the MCC members. So if you take out 20,000, then it's only an 80,000 kind of setup that you're looking
Mhm.
for. But in that regard, yeah, Perth 60,000, Gabba what 50,000
I think
maybe. I
by
can't
by the time
remember.
it gets its new renovations, I think it'll be right around 50. As I said in one, I said technically if you wanted to do it in Sydney, you could do a core stadium, the old Olympic Stadium, which I think is 80, which is
80,
the next
yeah.
biggest, but it's not exactly the greatest footy like
Nah, it's not. Yeah,
shape the way it is.
unfortunately.
It looks kind of funky. It is more for the rug. It is really built more
Yeah.
for rugby union than it is for footy. So I
Yeah.
understand many of the Sydney people that I talk to, they hate playing there because it's not ideal
I
for
think it's kind
footy.
of dangerous too. I remember when they used to play there, and because they'd used to have to unbolt
Hmm.
the seating for rugby games, they would have to move it out. But then there was kind
Hmm.
of like bolt holes and all sorts of different things in there, and underdeveloped grass and things like that that kind of made it a little bit dangerous to play there.
Yep.
With what I said in mind, though, My alternative is with the home of football being the home of football and everyone acknowledging that.
Mhm.
I don't see anyway. And 50-year agreement, crap. You can make an amendment to that. That doesn't have to sit how it sits.
Mhm.
With what I said in mind, I wouldn't be opposed to the MCG having the grand final every second year and then every other year
Mhm.
being on a rotating basis because every capital city, especially Adelaide and Perth, we've been football states for nearly just as long as Victoria. Victoria has the benefit of being the home of football because it's where it was developed as a uniquely Australian game, as said in that MCG tour from the tour guide. Um, yeah, the SANFL is the longest standing football league in Australia, and what was it? The first game was played in the 1850s in Melbourne, but my club Port Adelaide has been around since 1870, which is a 15 to 20-year gap, which isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. So, we've got far-reaching football history here in SA and in Perth, but even Brisbane and New South Wales being large capital cities with big enough stadiums, yeah, I just think it's ridiculous to keep it in one place every year. Like I said, every second year, I'm happy with that. But we saw what it brought to those particular cities in those particular years to have the grand final, and I just don't think that people should miss out on that enjoyment based on some stupid backdoor 50-year agreement that no one really got a say in.
Mhm. Again, I don't think I don't want to comment because I don't know how it went into it, and I've even heard some people say almost like the Olympics every 4 years, so then the MCC can't complain as much. Again,
Yeah.
how you want to do how you want to placate that, I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it, but it's a fascinating topic because it was Victorian media that brought it up, and I found that absolutely fascinating. So now we'll go from the Victorian question to the SA question because this year your beloved state gets to host the magic round ripoff that is Gather Round.
Gather round.
Again, I
Yeah.
will I will keep my opinion on the name to myself because whether it was really worth naming it, I don't know. But I'm fascinated as an SA person, your thoughts on having this unique event, and do you plan on going to more games besides the Port Adelaide game?
So number one, yeah, definitely going to the Port Adelaide game. Whether I go to more games, I probably have to again cross that bridge when I get to it. Having a young daughter at home kind of makes getting out the
Mhm.
house sometimes a bit difficult. But the attraction is definitely there, and I have a close friend who's a Melbourne supporter, so I'm not sure where they're playing over that weekend, but I'm sure he would want to go to a game, and yeah, like I know how well it will probably go, so yeah, I would definitely like to go to more than just the Port game. Our premier of the state did a magnificent job. He basically, yeah, throttled the AFL to kind
Mhm.
of
I heard all about it. I heard
sign
all
the
about
agreement. Yeah,
it.
but yeah, he's awesome and yeah, did a good job in securing it for us. So I think it's going to be great. Yeah, the name, whatever, it may change along the way, but I know how much crap they would have got if they called it a magic round as well. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, it is what it is. But looking forward to it nonetheless. It should be very interesting, and I think what it will do is bring a lot of people to Adelaide that haven't been here before, and Adelaide has definitely. For people interstate or East Coast, I guess you could say, they like to hang shit on us over here. But people who come here um, and experience it for what it is, yeah, it's beautiful. And we got more than enough to offer. So I think a lot of people will experience that firsthand, which is also great too.
Yeah, and the cool part about it is like I said, I listened to the SA Rush Hour, and the last I'd actually heard an update on one of the latest episodes that almost all of the hotels in Adelaide are booked up for that weekend. Like there are no
Yeah.
hotels, so it sounds like not only interstate, but even Adelaide people are super excited for this. And like I
Mm.
said, I hope it sells out, because my one worry with the Premier's kind of threat almost to the AFL, that if you send it to New South Wales and it bombs, we're not going to want it. That are people going to go? Because I know SA is footy mad and I absolutely love it, but my one worry was, are you going to want to go see two Victorian teams play each other? You're going to want to see a Queensland team and a Victorian team play. So, but everything I'm hearing, the tickets are selling like hotcakes, as they said. The hotels are all sold out. So I think SA is going to show up well. I think it's going to be fantastic. I cannot wait for it. It's going to be very interesting. I hope the Adelaide Oval holds up to all the games on it. And I really cross my fingers that it doesn't rain, because it's going to be terrible on that Adelaide Oval
Yeah, that's a good
surface
point.
late if it is not idealistic and perfect weather.
Yeah, yeah. I think what did they? It's round five, I think. So it's in
Yep.
April. So I think we're just on the back end of autumn. So yeah, fingers crossed it's not a wet weekend, but yeah, touch wood, it should be okay.
Touch wood.
I'm not sure if every game will sell out, but it's
Some
unique.
have smaller things. I know that I think
Yeah,
there's only like 30, there's only like 3,000 tickets that'll probably it's but that's I think the Fremantle North Melbourne game. So it'll be interesting to see how that one is attended. So
yeah, definitely, definitely.
yeah. Alrighty. So we'll jump to this. Most people that watch this channel know that I am a massive advocate for women's footy. I think women's footy is a growth spot for the AFL. I think it is the one thing the AFL really needs at this time for growth.
Yeah.
So I ask, do you keep an eye on the AFLW? And if so, do you keep an eye on your Port Adelaide Power, who came in this last year? And I will give you a tip of my hat, sir. The Alberton folks showed up for the women's game this year, and I truly and genuinely appreciate seeing all that teal and black being able to watch the women play footy this year.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And it's a kind of coming home story in a way for Port Adelaide being able to put Alberton Oval on the national stage because that's our that's our soul, that's our home. And obviously moving away from the SANFL meant that we had to play at a bigger ground. So uh, moving away from the SANFL, should I say? I don't know if I said that properly, but
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Women's having an avenue for women's football is fantastic. I've always been for it. You always um, enjoy it for what it is because it will take time to develop, like any good thing does. But I went there for the first Alberton Oval home game as well, and it was great. It was packed out. Um, the redeveloped precinct that's down there, the bars and stuff, they're all full. It was a great atmosphere. In terms of the side, I kept an eye on how they were going throughout the season, but in all honesty, I didn't expect much going into it anyway. It's hard to uh, synergize a group of people, and especially football. It's so dynamic. There's so much going on within a game. You could tell that they had a focus of contested football and tackling, which is great. You know, people are always going to admire that. But I think where they let themselves down predominantly was connection between each line in the field, defense to midfield, midfield to forward. Which develops over time again. They only had about 8 to 10 weeks together to develop a game plan and train together. So I think it was just more about the fact that we're finally represented as Port supporters. We finally have a team to get behind, and the football will improve as the years go on.
Yeah, 100%. Did you pick a favorite player on the team? Because you got some really good ones for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Abby Dowrick was definitely an early favorite of mine. Uh, yeah, she plays football in the right way, and I guess when with women's football or women's AFL, you've got players who've all come from various different sporting backgrounds, who either were always a football fan and wanted to play football but couldn't, so went off into other sports, like Erin Phillips, I guess you could say, or and or you've got players who were tall and they've been playing basketball and they've been scouted because they could fit a role within an AFLW side. And then you have Abby Derrick and young players like that who we will get a lot more of now, who have kind of been playing in women's football pathways from junior junior level, and have been drafted from that kind of avenue. So she came in and she has that kind of natural footballing ability, toughness as well, and has a good kick to go on top of it. So yeah, she was definitely an early favorite of mine, and definitely she didn't let herself down through it as the season went on, for sure.
Yeah, and then Hannah Ewings is another one. Abby
Yeah,
Dorwick and Hannah Ewings. Those two could be your next Ann Hatchard, Ebony Marinoff type of pairing because those two are
yeah,
both super footballers. I cannot
yeah.
wait to watch them
Hannah
develop.
Ewings as well. Again, yeah, she has the benefit of coming through
Mhm.
junior women's football programs. So we'll see a lot more of those types of players just come in and be
Mhm.
able to impact at a young age, I think,
Yep,
as the
never
years
had to
go on.
stop. They never had to stop playing footy. They could play it from when they were little girls and could play it all the way through. They didn't have to stop. So I'm
Yeah.
100% with you. This thing is only going to get better. It is a different sport, so it is an acquired taste, but when you get it is fascinating to watch these women because I've said it. I think sometimes the women go harder at the footy than the men do. And it's no disrespect to the
It's
men,
really interesting. Yeah.
but it does. I've seen some of these women. They are crashing packs just as crazy. It's so much fun to watch. I think the rules a little bit hamper the women. I would love to see, and I've thrown this topic up, and some of the women supporters agree with me. I think the men and the women should switch games. I think the men should play 16 aside with the lasso rule, and I think the women should play 18. Well, because if you look at it, the men have so many more years of experience and coaching and different things like that. I think the lasso rule would be perfect because then you get rid of the intentional rule because now it's pretty simple between outside the arcs in between the 50s. If it goes out and you kick it, it's a turnover.
Yeah, that's actually a
There's
rule that
no
we
debate
have
at all.
in the SANFL, which is it makes it a whole lot easier for the umpire to officiate,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems like a no brainer. I think there's a conspiracy, if you want to delve into conspiracies, that because the SANFL thought of it, the AFL doesn't want to implement it. But we all know that it would make the umpire's job a whole lot easier in officiating a game of AFL if you
Especially
just
in
did
that.
last kick or handball out of bounds in between the
Mm-hmm.
arcs, like you said, and it's a turnover. Then
Yep.
you wouldn't have to, oh, did he intend to do it? Did he try and keep it
Uh-huh.
in? It doesn't matter.
Yep.
Um, uh,
Insufficient intent is the most
but
ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous thing. But I think so. I think the men should go to 16, and I think the women should go to 18 because I think if you make that discussion, the women can't kick as long. Why do they have to have less players? Why can't it be
less
the other way
players, yeah.
around? In my personal opinion, it should be the other way around. Again, I'm a huge advocate for the women's game, so I see it a little bit differently than some. But I think it'd be fascinating to see the men and women switch games. Like I think it'd be fascinating. So all right. I say this in all of my episodes because I love this part of I'm doing some research because I've told many I've not been to Australia. It is on my bucket list. I want to get to as many of the big stadiums, Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia, Sydney, and Melbourne. I want to try to get to them all. I know it's going to cost a fortune, but I want to do it. So I'm doing some research to get a couple of things ready for when I do go. So as an American, we love our food when it comes to the sport. So I asked this of my Australian friends, what is your go-to food when you go to the footy?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I've heard you mention that a lot of people would say like a bucket of chips and whatnot, and it's easy, it's quick and easy. Yeah. Everyone loves fried potato. I tend to like a hot dog.
Mhm.
Um, and they used to be a bit better, in my opinion. They used to be run by a small foods company called Barossa Fine Foods, who used to do, and they probably still buy the hot dogs from them, but they just sell them in the Adelaide Oval cafeteria kiosks, we call them.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think I generally go the hot dog. Again, it's nice and easy, cheese and bacon. Put it on there every single time. Um, I'm a bit different to a lot of Australians. A lot of Australians like to put tomato sauce and cover it on a hot dog. I'm more of a mustard fan because I appreciate um, the cohesion. So
Mhm.
yeah, definitely. That's probably my go-to. A bit of a weird one is salt and pepper squid, fried calamari.
Mhm.
Occasionally, if I feel like a bit of seafood, but it's a really odd thing to eat at a sports event. But hey, they sell it there, so sometimes I buy it.
The one thing I notice when it comes to food is it's always finger food because it's always got to be quick. Because as soon as you add a utensil, it complicates so many
Yeah.
things for
And what
sure.
happens when you jump out of your seat, you know?
Well, and we've seen so many of the bloopers on any, and if you watch any sports center in any of the world, you always see the blooper of the guy that's just come back from the stand and he's got his nachos or his hot dog or his pizza, and a fly ball or a puck comes at him and he goes to fly it and that goes and hits the
Food
people
goes
three
elsewhere.
rows behind them. So it happens. All right. And then my other question when it comes to is I want to find the ideal place to sit. I want to get the full and best place to sit. So where is your ideal place to sit when you go to the footy?
So when you watch games at Adelaide Oval on TV, where I am currently is the third tier of the Eastern Stand, right at the front, which is actually a great vantage point from an analyst kind of point of view because you have a great view of the whole field. So you can kind of see play developing kind of everywhere if you kind of look at the whole ground itself. However, you'll notice there's a bay of red colored seats just below that. I believe it's the second tier, a bit more pricier, but it offers a similar like vantage, not a similar vantage point, but it ticks the box for vantage point, but it
Mhm.
also ticks the box of being kind of close to the action. It's that great midway point between those two preferences that people tend to have.
Mhm.
So that would actually be the best place to sit. Again, most people like to sit somewhere in the center so they have equal kind of share of both sides of the ground. So yeah, I think if you sat center wing in that second bay with the red seats at Adelaide Oval, that would probably be the best vantage point, best place
Man.
to sit, in my opinion, from a watching football perspective. If you want to be in the thick of it at Adelaide Oval, it's unique. I know that the previous guest from the Adelaide Crows episode mentioned the hill. It just offers that unique element, and it's kind of sitting with Gen Pop,
Mhm.
just your average football fan who's come along to the football, wants to enjoy a few beers and can tend to get a bit rowdy. It's good for comedic value as well, and just your knockabout football lover. When it's busy and when there's a lot of people there, it's actually quite fun and quite funny to be around that environment. So too different. It depends what you're kind of looking for. But if you have a seat in the one that I mentioned with the second tier, you can always pop down to the hill and then go back to your seat. So
Mhm.
yeah, good for two different things, but that's probably what I would say.
Awesome, awesome. And then I always end my episodes with this just because I love hearing all the different answers. I've even tried to look some of these games up and see some of the highlights from most memorable game of footy you have ever seen, live, at the ground, on the telly, doesn't matter. Favorite game of footy you've ever seen.
Of any team.
Any team, you're this is completely your choice.
Excuse me. As much as I hate it when Port aren't playing finals. So when Port aren't playing finals, it's generally hard to watch. Um, but the last good grand final I think we had was the 2018 grand final between
Mhm.
Collingwood and West Coast. Um, Close finals are always good, and especially close grand finals because it's it's the prize on the line. Um, so that game was good. Obviously, Collingwood got out to a handy early lead, and West Coast pegged it back along the way. Um, Collingwood shot again, I think, in the last quarter, and then West Coast pegged it back, and then they ended up taking over. So I guess that's probably my most memorable game in recent memory. Yeah, just off a quick think. Yeah, always enjoy a close final and a close grand final.
Yeah, that was a good one. As an American, I will admit it. Most of the people over here in the USAFL, we all kind of started donning the Collingwood black and white because of Mason Cox. We all kind of wanted
Yeah,
to see him find a way to win the title. He fell just a little bit short, but the run that he had, including that game against the Richmond, let's just safe to say there was a lot of people in the USAFL. We were screaming from the top of our lungs to try to find a way to get him on Sports Center. Over here it didn't work, unfortunately, but we you could definitely tell there was a lot of positivity out of the USAFL to see him have such a successful game against, I mean, at the time the Richmond Tigers were one of the best teams in the entire competition. There was no
yeah, they
argument.
let themselves down by not
Yeah.
going all the way that year.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So before we get done with this, I almost forgot to mention this, that as a Port supporter, you have a podcast about the Power from Port podcast. Just really quickly, can you talk to me just a little bit about this podcast, and how can we get a hold of it for any of the Port fans that maybe don't know about your podcast?
Well, it's definitely on a hiatus, that's for sure. I started it while my partner was pregnant, and I was probably a bit naive to think that could continue
Mm-hmm.
uh, once my daughter was born, but it definitely made it very hard. I guess you're going to have to go back on all good podcast avenues, to Spotify's and things like that, Apple Podcasts, um, to see some fairly raw, or listen to some fairly raw um, audio in regards to my thoughts of Port Adelaide in the 2021 season, I think it was. Yeah. Yeah. Look, like I said, it's on hiatus at the moment. I basically started to do it because I always have a lot of thoughts about not only Port, but football in general. I like to keep my finger on the pulse of the whole football landscape. But obviously, I have a love for Port Adelaide. So, more than happy to talk Port Adelaide, and just kind of, I digested or consumed a lot of port podcasts that are out there, and just thought I could contribute my own thoughts and feelings in the landscape. So I thought I'd give it a go. It was kind of encouraged off of the back of Travis Boak's 300th game, and I mentioned earlier that 2007 big year for me in terms of following football, and it was the first his first season, and I've kind of lived my football life with him, I guess you could say, and then
Mm-hmm.
some others who have recently retired. Um, but I just wanted to just throw it out there, see what happened, and kind of went from there. And then yeah, really enjoyed it. Breaking down a game in review and then previewing a game ahead, um, all the way up until the finals that season. But yeah, like I said, it's on a bit of a back burner, and with hopes to get it back up and running again. But yeah, life gets in the way sometimes, so just trying to sort out some logistics in that way. But more than happy to jump on other people's podcasts and provide my thoughts and feelings on football and Port if need be.
Awesome. Well, I genuinely appreciate it. I genuinely appreciate it, Jamie. It's been fantastic. Again, you have such passion for your club, and I absolutely love it. And being somebody that, as a podcaster, I'm trying to connect with other podcasts. I think it's one of those great things that we're a unique bunch. We love to talk, and many of us have very unique takes on things. So sometimes it's
Yeah.
fascinating to connect and find a way to kind of find out. And for me, being an AFL kind of neutral when it comes to my podcasts, though sometimes I do don the red swans hat for sure. I will gladly say that, but many times I try to keep on the black neutral hat for most, because I like being as even as I possibly can. So I
Mm-hmm.
love finding podcasts like yours that just, you give your raw, honest opinion. I absolutely love that. So I genuinely appreciate you having on the podcast today.
No, likewise. I appreciate you asking me on, and it's been a pleasure to chat football in anticipation for the season ahead.
Yeah, I always love it. Making sure the off season we can get to it, because these sometimes these couple of months, especially up here in Iowa, when it's wintry and snowy and cold, it's fun to sit down and have a chat with somebody that's enjoying their summer down in Australia. So, ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen, that is going to do it for our podcast today. Thank you for listening in. Again, I've got more podcasts. Sandful, VFL, and Waffle teams are still to come. I'm finishing up my AFL ones. I'm still missing a Gold Coast fan. So if you know a Gold Coast supporter that would be interested in chatting, please have them reach out to me on my socials. I can't wait to do that. And that is going to do it for our episode. And we will be back again very, very soon.